"I killed her, but they'll never prove it." The voice was calm. Almost amused. A man sits in a quiet room, unaware he's being recorded. Confessing to one of the most brutal murders in history. But here's the problem. By the time anyone heard that recording, the case was already cold. The victim? Elizabeth Short. A young woman whose body was found cut in half, drained of blood, and displayed like a message. And the killer? He may have lived the rest of his life, completely free. But this story doesn't start with a confession. It starts with a discovery so disturbing. It changed Los Angeles forever. And by the end of this video, you might believe the killer was hiding in plain sight all along. If you enjoy stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing to the Story Vault. It's a quiet way of showing support, and it helps bring more stories like this to light. Now, January 15, 1947. The morning air was cold, but the streets were quiet. A woman walked down a dusty path with her young daughter, heading toward a nearby shoe repair shop. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. Until she saw it. Something pale, lying in the grass. At first glance, it looked like a mannequin. Perfectly still. Limbs stretched out unnaturally. She paused. Something wasn't right. The body was too still, too deliberate. She stepped closer. And that's when the illusion shattered. It wasn't a mannequin. It was a human body. Cut clean in half. The woman grabbed her child and ran, her heart pounding as panic set in. Within minutes, police were called. Officers arrived expecting a routine disturbance. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. The body lay in two separate pieces, carefully placed side by side. There was no blood on the ground. Not even a stain. Which meant one thing. This wasn't the crime scene. It was a stage. Whoever did this didn't just kill her. They wanted her to be found. And that raises a question that still lingers today. Why display the body, but hide the crime? As detectives began examining the remains, the details became even more disturbing. The cuts were precise. Not jagged. Not rushed. Clean. Almost surgical. It suggested skill. Knowledge. Control. This wasn't rage. It was method. And then there was the face. A deep, deliberate cut stretched from the corners of her mouth to her ears, forming a permanent, haunting smile. The kind that doesn't fade, even in death. The kind meant to send a message. But to who? As the investigation began, officers worked quickly to identify the victim. It didn't take long. Her name was Elizabeth Short. She was only 22 years old. A young woman chasing a dream in a city that promised everything, and gave her nothing. She had come to Los Angeles hoping to become an actress. And in many ways, she looked the part. Dark hair. Pale skin. A quiet kind of beauty that made people look twice. She often wore black, moving through the city like a shadow with ambition. That's how she got the nickname. The Black Dahlia. Inspired by the film The Blue Dahlia, a crime story that had recently captured public attention. But unlike the movie, there would be no ending to this story. At least, not a clean one. Elizabeth's life in Hollywood wasn't glamorous. She drifted from place to place, staying with friends, acquaintances, sometimes strangers. Always trying to find her footing. Always trying to get noticed. But behind the charm, there was instability. Uncertainty. And a growing sense that something wasn't right. Friends would later describe her as kind, but secretive. Careful about what she shared. As if she knew something. Or someone. Was watching. And then came the detail that changed everything. There were no signs of struggle on her body. No defensive wounds. No indication that she fought back. Which leads to a chilling possibility. She may have known her killer. Trusted them. Walked willingly into whatever happened next. Think about that. Someone she trusted. Someone she possibly spent time with. May have been the one who ended her life in the most calculated way imaginable. And then carefully cleaned the body. Transported it. And placed it in an open lot, for the world to see. But the story doesn't stop there. Because just days after her body was discovered, someone decided to speak. Not to the police, but to the press. A mysterious package arrived at a newspaper office. Inside, Elizabeth's personal belongings. Her birth certificate. Her address book. Items that only the killer could have had. But what made it even more disturbing was how they were presented. Clean. Carefully arranged. Not a single fingerprint. It was intentional. Controlled. Almost theatrical. As if the killer wasn't just committing a crime. They were telling a story. And they wanted the world to watch. But why go through all that effort? Just to remain hidden? That question would haunt investigators for years. Because the more they dug into the case, the more it slipped through their fingers. Leads went cold. Witnesses contradicted themselves. And the city of Los Angeles became consumed by fear, rumors, and speculation. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a suspect. But no one had the truth. And somewhere in all that chaos, the person responsible was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Possibly even enjoying the attention. Because this wasn't just murder. It was a performance. And the final act was far from over. And just when it seemed like the case couldn't get any stranger, it did. The Los Angeles Police Department was flooded with leads. Over 150 suspects were questioned. Some came forward voluntarily, others had to be tracked down. But what truly shocked investigators wasn't just the number of suspects. It was the confessions. Dozens of people claimed they were the killer. Men. Women. Strangers with no connection to Elizabeth Short at all. Some wanted attention. Some were unstable. Some gave details that sounded convincing. Until they didn't. Every promising lead collapsed under scrutiny. And slowly, the case began to rot from the inside. Evidence went missing. Reports conflicted. Key opportunities slipped away. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was becoming a failure. But one name refused to disappear. George Hodel. A respected doctor on the surface. But beneath that, something darker. Years later, his own son, an investigator, would accuse him of being the killer. Not based on rumors. But evidence. Photographs. Connections. And most chilling of all, a hidden recording. On that tape, a man believed to be Hodel said, "I suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now." It sounded like a confession. But by then, it was too late. No charges were ever filed. No arrest was ever made. And the case was officially closed. But here's the part that doesn't sit right. What if that voice was telling the truth? What if the killer wasn't some unknown shadow, but a man who lived freely, worked openly, and died without ever facing justice? A man who blended into society so perfectly. No one could prove what he had done. That possibility is what keeps this case alive. Because somewhere in the past, Between the lies, the mistakes, and the silence, the truth still exists. Buried. Waiting. And maybe, just maybe, one detail was overlooked. One clue ignored. One moment that could have changed everything. So now the question isn't just who killed Elizabeth Short. It's this. How close did they really come to catching him? If this story pulled you in, take a second to like the video, and if you want more mysteries that stay with you, subscribe to the Story Vault. And tell me in the comments. Do you think George Hodel was the killer, or is the truth still hidden?